Thank you. I have no conflict to disclose, and thank you everyone who made it up after the party. That's pretty impressive. I'm very pleased to be the first speaker this morning, and I'm going to speak to you about the International Rare Diseases Research Consortium. So this is a group that was founded in 2011 and has a significant aspect of its work focused on the sharing of genomic information to understand all the different causes and provide diagnoses for rare diseases. I have been the chair of the Diagnostics Committee for 7 years. I am now almost finished being the chair. This is the last talk. So ERDIC's strategy and how we approach this is really around the engagement of stakeholders. At its very essence, ERDIC is driven by research funders. And so the blue people are represented by funding bodies. Companies are also involved as stakeholders. There's umbrella patient advocacy groups, researchers, and experts. And they're all focused on sort of the pie chart to accelerate diagnosis and therapeutic development for rare diseases worldwide. We'll focus on the diagnosis piece for today. So in 2011, it was formed. It initially had sort of 20 funders who were involved from multiple countries. You can see from both the map and the graph that this has been increasing significantly, such that there is now over 40 different funders who are involved. It is very much driven from a funders, company, industry type of approach from the top in terms of how we coordinate that kind of money. And ERDIC actually represents at least $2 billion in funding that is directed towards rare disease research. And much of this has to really be focused on how do we coordinate that research. For the first 5 years, our goals were to enable the development of 200 new therapies for rare diseases by 2020, and a means to diagnose most rare diseases by 2020. The 200 therapy goal was reached in 2017. The means to diagnose most rare diseases, as many of you in the audience know, is significantly overhyped. I myself was one of the people who said we would get it all figured out by 2020. That is completely not true. And it is still ongoing. So in 2017, we got together and redid this for a 10-year plan, and the vision now is to enable all people living with a rare disease to receive an accurate diagnosis, care, and available therapy within 1 year of coming to medical attention. We'll focus on Goal 1, which is relevant to today and we can discuss after. So that's really around a diagnosis within a year if it can be solved. But then all undiagnosed individuals will enter a globally coordinated diagnostic and research pipeline, and this is more the emphasis for today's debate. More information can be found in that reference there. So the way that ERDIC is set up in terms of how it does this is developing policies and guidelines that can be used for the funders and for industry in terms of how we share data. We have a set of recognized resources that people can use, researchers can use, other community stakeholders can use, and then there's a roadmap and actions on how to move this forward. And I'll just briefly outline those for you. So the very first thing we did was develop this set of policies and guidelines, of which there are a number shown in red there. The one that is relevant today is to data sharing and standards. We work very closely with the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, and we do many partnered projects, which you'll hear about from our next speaker. So these documents provide guidance and recommendations on key topics, and they're adopted by the ERDIC member organizations who are funding research. With respect to the recognized resources, these are peer-reviewed resources that are put forward to the community to use, such that they are believed that they'll be able to accelerate research to the clinic translation. These are reviewed by members of our scientific committees and independent researchers not linked to ERDIC, and these are the criteria for evaluation are based on our policies and guidelines. We have 22 recognized resources that are available, can be found on the website, and you can see that they're in a smattering of different domains. So there's a number of databases that are particularly useful, for example, that's very relevant to some of the data sharing standards, platforms, that sort of thing. Because we also do a lot of work in the therapies end of things as well, there's a number of resources in that domain as well. This is sort of how they look, and you'll recognize some of them. For example, the databases and some of the platforms that would be relevant, and these are continually are put forward for consideration. Now, finally, this is probably the most important slide of the bunch. And so ERDIC has developed a roadmap in terms of how to move forward, and there are actions related to all of this. And so you can see the roadmap is in the boxes that are sort of gray, and then some of the actions that have been put together are in pink. And many of them are around a particular area where we see that there's a need, and a need to get a group of international folks together to talk about these things. Many of them, as you can see, are focused on therapeutic development, but there are a number relevant to data sharing, and I'll highlight one of those, which is matchmaker exchange. But basically, after the very first ERDIC meeting, global meeting that we held in Dublin, in 2013, we had a satellite meeting related to that, and that is actually where the concept of matchmaker exchange was born. And so what Matchmaker Exchange is, which some of you may know, because I think many are involved in some contributing data to some of these databases, is the premise of two-sided matchmaking. And what that is that two people have a hypothesis. It's like a Go Fish game. Do you have X? And then somebody will reply, yes, I have X, or no, I don't have X. And what happened in around 2013, we had a meeting at ASHG, actually, and we sat in a room and realized that we were developing a number of databases that all were doing great things in terms of sharing genomic data, but they were all doing it in a complete silo. And we ran this experiment where we sort of had some great smart folks have a think about it and used the birthday paradox to equate to the genomic paradox, which means how many unsolved cases do you need to have in a database in order to solve all the different rare diseases. The number is actually predicted to be 200,000. And so with all of this, it was great, but some of these databases then that only have a few thousand cases are not going to be very useful unless they can reach out to the others. And so what happened now, and it took a long time. We thought this would actually only run for a year, my second biggest wrong prediction. And so in March 2019, this is currently what it looks like. It now runs through this exchange platform, such that if you put your data in Phenome Central, like I would, because that's our Canadian database that we use for one of our big research projects called Care for Rare, it will go in through the application programming interface, and then you can query any other database. It's essentially like using some of these services online where you're trying to find the cheapest hotel and it searches all the different sites for you. It's exactly the same thing. And it returns an answer to you. And so that's been working super well. And I think one of the very important things that we did for this is look at how we're going to share this type of data. This is the informed consent policy. The references there on the bottom right. And really we looked at two different types of data that we were sharing through this because we wanted to enable as much data going through as possible. And the first is that no additional consent is required. We call that level 1 sharing. This is high-level phenotype terms and a candidate gene name without a variant. And then level 2, whereas consent is required when you have deeper information, including more sensitive phenotype information and sequence-related information. And this sort of very simple structure has enabled an amazing amount of data to be shared through this. We have the data from over 100,000 patients now being shared from 84 countries. And the number of matches, we're just showing some gene matcher stats there, which is the most popular database, quite hands down. And literally, they have now over 11,000, actually that's a lot of date, 11,000 different genes documented in that database. So the chance you're going to get a match is actually quite high. The one challenge with all this is that the false positive rate is also quite high. But it has been making discoveries, and it makes discoveries every day. So in the end, for the best outcome for patients, we need to share data on a global scale and then critically evaluate evidence as a collective community. I think the ERDIC approach has really been around research data, and I think some of the what we will see from some of the other speakers today and hear about is that most of our data that is genomic data is now going to be generated by healthcare institutions, and that brings a complete extra layer. And so it then becomes a question of how are clinicians like myself then going to enable this data sharing in order to provide diagnoses to as many families as we can. Thank you.